Hey, what's going on? My name is Michael. You guys are watching IDB, and in this video, I want to talk about my iPhone 14 Pro Max. I've been using this iPhone for over 200 days since it first came out in September. I guess you can call this video my long-term review of the 14 Pro Max. I want to talk about 5 things that I've noticed about this iPhone since I first started using it in September. Let's go ahead, roll the intro, and jump right in. The first topic I want to cover with the 14 Pro Max is battery life. When I first started using this iPhone in September, honestly, I was pretty put off by how bad the battery life was. You may have read some of the reports online when this iPhone was first released, and many of those articles were reporting how the new always-on display was draining the battery on the 14 Pro models. Now, I do think that was a very small piece of the problem. I definitely don't get the same battery as I did on my 13 Pro Max, but luckily with software updates, the battery on the 14 Pro Max has gotten way better since it first came out. If I was getting the same battery as I did in September, I would definitely not be as happy with this phone as I am right now. Like I said, the iPhone I had before this was the 13 Pro Max, and that phone is pretty much the battery champ of all iPhones ever released. I think I get pretty much the same battery now as I got with my 13 Pro Max. It may be slightly worse, but the battery, like I said, has definitely improved with software updates. Another thing I should mention is I am getting pretty decent battery life, even though I've been running beta versions of Apple's software on my iPhone. Right now I'm running iOS 16.5 beta, and before this I was on 16.4 beta and 16.3 beta. So if you are running the public releases of iOS software, you might be getting even better battery life, so that's a good thing. If I jump into settings and go battery and then battery health, you can see my battery health is at 100%. But if you follow me on Twitter and have seen some of my other tips and tricks videos, you know that this is actually a lie and there is a different way to actually check your battery health. So after jumping into analytics and running a shortcut I have, you can see that my actual battery health is 93.79, which does make a lot more sense. If you want more information on this, I will link below the video where I talked about how you can get this shortcut, but here is my actual battery health. There is no way that a phone that is 200 days old is still gonna have 100% battery life. So why Apple does that, I have no idea, but it is nice that you're still able to see your actual battery health by running this shortcut. So once again, I'll have a link in the description. In that video, I talked about how you can get this shortcut. Now, I would say that the battery on the 14 Pro Max is definitely good enough to be a 2-day phone. However, I don't usually put myself in situations where I'm away from a charger for 2 days. Usually the longest amount of time I'll go between charges is a day and a half. And after I go a day and a half without charging, my battery is usually somewhere between 20% or even down to 10%. A few things I do in order to save battery when I start getting really low is I turn my phone into low power mode. This is the most basic one. It lives inside of Control Center and also settings. What this is going to do is it's going to reduce some of the background activity on your iPhone, and it's also going to limit the refresh rate of the display down to 60 Hertz instead of 120 Hertz. And another really drastic measure I use when I'm really running low on battery life is inside of accessibility settings. So click on accessibility, then choose display and text size, then scroll down and choose color filters, then turn it on and make sure that grayscale is turned on. When you have this set, the colors on your display are going to be turned off and your phone is just going to be in black and white. And this is going to limit the power draw of your display. And if you have this on in conjunction with low power mode, you can extend your iPhone's battery significantly. So to wrap up the battery section, I'd say the 14 Pro Max is almost as good as the 13 Pro Max, but not quite. The always-on display definitely does drain the battery a little bit, but this is still the best battery life I've ever had in a smartphone, and it can definitely last well over a day. The next thing I want to talk about is the display. The first point I have in my notes is the brightness. I am so happy with the brightness on my 14 Pro Max. Coming from the 13 Pro Max to the 14 Pro Max, it almost feels like double the amount of brightness when I'm out in sunlight. When I had my 13 Pro mounted in the car and sunlight was shining directly on the screen, you can tell that the iPhone was maxing out on auto brightness, but I still couldn't really see everything perfectly on the screen, and the glare was still there because the screen couldn't get bright enough. But here with the 14 Pro Max, the brightness is honestly so bright that it just looks like a sticker on the glass of your iPhone. It really is hard to explain unless you see this phone in person, but when your iPhone is put in direct sunlight and the sun is hitting the sensor right on the top of the screen, this iPhone gets so bright that it is honestly insane. So there is honestly no situation I can put my iPhone in where it is not visible. However, with that point about the extreme brightness, if you are maxing out the brightness and you're outside, the display is going to dim quite aggressively. That is because the temperature sensor in your iPhone is getting pretty hot, and in order to save the battery health of your iPhone, it is going to dim the screen. So what I do in order to max out brightness and not have my phone get too hot is in the summer, I have my iPhone mounted right in front of my air conditioning vent in my car. That way I can have cold air blowing right on the back of my iPhone and I can still have the screen brightness completely maxed out. Another point about the display is the 120 Hz refresh rate. Now the iPhone 13 Pro also had this, but even to this day with the 14 Pro Max, after using it for almost an entire year, the display still shocks me how smooth and buttery it feels. Whether I'm navigating through the UI or scrolling through Twitter, every single day the smooth refresh rate of my iPhone still impresses me. One final point about the display, I already mentioned this in the battery section previously, but the always-on display on the 14 Pro and Pro Max is honestly so convenient. The number one situation I use it in is when I'm laying in bed and I have my iPhone mounted on my bedside charger. It is so nice to just look over and quickly check the time instead of tapping the screen to wake up the display. And it's also nice with the always-on display to see at the bottom of the screen if I have any notifications if I'm not wearing my Apple Watch. And speaking of the Apple Watch, the iPhone 14 Pro does something really cool if you have an Apple Watch in terms of the always-on display. It's going to know if you are in the same room as your iPhone. So for example, if you leave your iPhone in a room and you're wearing your Apple Watch, but you walk out of the room, these two devices are going to talk to each other and they're going to know that they are not nearby. And knowing that, it's going to shut off the always-on display on your iPhone in order to save battery life. That is super cool. And in a pretty early software update that these phones got, Apple included the option to customize your always-on display. If you click on Display and Brightness, scroll down and choose Always On Display. From here, you can choose to show your notifications and also show your wallpaper. So if you turn both of these off, you're going to have a really clean look to your Always On display. So from the absolutely insane peak outdoor brightness, the ultra smooth 120 Hz refresh rate, and the super convenient always on display, I am very, very impressed with the screen on this iPhone 14 Pro Max. The next thing I want to talk about is the dynamic island. Now, I could have included this in the display section, but the island is such a unique part of the iPhone 14 Pro that I figured I'd make it its own section in the video. I am honestly surprised at just how useful the dynamic island is on my iPhone 14 Pro. At first, I thought it was going to be just a gimmick, one of those iPhone features that looks really cool and flashy, but isn't really that useful. But honestly, it is so useful and I use it every single day. The main use that I love with the island is when I'm at the gym. I like to track my progress and my workouts in the Notes app. And at the same time, when I'm at the gym, I'm listening to music. So what I do is I have my Notes app open, and when I'm playing music, my island is showing my now playing music. And I'm able to control my music playback without leaving the Notes app. And this is so convenient for me when I'm working out. And speaking of the gym, whenever I get to the gym and put my headphones in, I open up my AirPods next to my iPhone. The island shows the battery level of my AirPods when I put them in my ear. I also really like whenever I have a timer going on my iPhone, I can see it up in the island as well. It's pretty convenient if I want to check the status of my dinner, for example, if I'm cooking something in the oven. All I have to do if I want to pause the timer is press and hold on it and click on pause. It's really convenient to have your timers live here at the top of the screen as well. And I also like using the island for third-party applications. There is an app I use every single time there's a hockey game I'm following called Sports Alerts. If I click on this menu icon in the top, I can click on Start Live Activity. And if I swipe up to go home, you can see that that sporting event is now living at the top of my screen. And this will update in real time as soon as the game starts. I also use the island when I'm traveling. There is an app I use called Flighty to track all of my flights. Now, I don't have any flights in here, so if I click on Generate a Random Flight, I can add it to the island to show you what it looks like. So it's gonna scan for a random flight here. I will click on this and I'll make sure that it is in my live activities by clicking here and then make sure it's turned on. And then when I swipe up to go home, you can see I'm able to view all of the information about my flight in the island. Right here, it shows how long until departure, and it also shows the gate that the flight is leaving out of. If you press and hold on it, you get even more information. And another cool thing about this application, if you are in flight, it's gonna show how much time you have left in the air right here in the island. There are also some really small things I like about the island as well, such as when I switch from ring to silent, you can see how it animates really cool at the top of the screen like that. And I also like when I unlock with Face ID, how you get that really cool animation out of the island, as you can see. And I also find it really cool that built into the A16 chip on this iPhone 14 Pro is a display driver whose sole purpose is to power the animations for the island. So this is one of those features that only Apple could pull off. The next section I want to cover is the camera. The camera on this iPhone 14 Pro is honestly so good, and iPhone cameras are honestly getting to a level where they can replace dedicated DSLR cameras. Not in every situation, but in very fast point and shoot situations, the computational photography in iPhone cameras are getting so darn good. The main photos that I take on the 14 Pro are pretty similar to the 13 Pro Max, and that really isn't a bad thing because the iPhone 13 Pro had a pretty good camera already. There really isn't much else Apple can do with the smartphone camera apart from making the sensor a lot bigger. I do find that when I'm shooting in low light situations, the shutter speed is a lot faster on this phone compared to my 13 Pro. And when I'm using night mode, I find I don't have to hold my iPhone still for quite as long as I did with my previous 13 Pro. The main camera on the 14 Pro is now 48 megapixels. I don't find myself using this mode that often simply because the file size is so big because you have to shoot in Apple ProRAW. But when I do use ProRAW and shoot in 48 megapixels, the detail that you can get out of this camera is absolutely superb. So on your screen now, I'll show a few 48 megapixel photos I took with this iPhone. The detail is absolutely insane. It feels like you can zoom in endlessly and still get a sharp image. In terms of video quality, you probably already know this, but iPhone video is some of the best smartphone video you can get. And it's to a point now where iPhone video has been so good that even if you have, for example, an iPhone 12 Pro, that video is still going to blow you away in terms of quality. And it just gets even better with the large sensor on the 14 Pro Max. The video is so sharp, so smooth. It is fantastic in low light. The autofocus is so fast. Sometimes when I'm watching the footage out of this iPhone, I am shocked that it was taken with a smartphone. Sometimes the video quality is even better than my dedicated YouTube camera. So this really is an insane device for recording video. And if you want to start a YouTube channel, for example, using an iPhone is a fantastic way to start. A few things I can add on top of the video section. With the iPhone 14 Pro, Apple added a new option called Action Mode. So when you're in video, all you have to do is tap the toggle on the top left. It's going to downscale your video to 2.8K. You can also change it to 1080p if you like to. Now this is meant for really high intensity sports or action scenes where you're going to be really shaking the camera. I find it works pretty well. It doesn't work that well in low light, but if you are going to be filming something where your iPhone is really going to be jittery, this is a really nice feature to have. Another update to video, even though I don't use it that often, is cinematic mode now supports 4K. So if you like that really cool cinematic look with the blurred out background behind the subject, you can now get that in a super sharp 4K. A few other things I like about the 14 Pro Max's camera is the ultra wide lens. I like putting it in 0.5 and getting some macro shots. I don't do this that often, and I honestly did it a lot more when the iPhone was new because I was trying out the new features. But every now and then I remember that the iPhone can take macro shots, and it is pretty fun to put your iPhone in 0.5 and get super close to a subject and take a photo of it. But possibly my favorite upgrade about the 14 Pro, and I saved this for the end of the section because it is my favorite upgrade, is the front-facing camera. The front-facing camera on the iPhone 14 Pro and Pro Max now support autofocus. It has been so overdue, but you can now take selfies that actually focus on your face. Many people were actually surprised by this when Apple included autofocus when they updated it with the iPhone 14, but even up to the iPhone 13 and 13 Pro, those front-facing cameras did not have autofocus. The front-facing camera had a fixed focus length. So now on your iPhone 14, when you take a selfie, your iPhone is actually able to focus on your face and get a really sharp photo. So from the upgrades to the main camera, which is better in low light and can now shoot 48 megapixel photos, to the amazing iPhone video quality, the upgrades to the ultra wide camera, which can now take macro shots, and the awesome front-facing camera that now has autofocus, I honestly do believe that this is the best camera in a smartphone right now. And the final topic I want to cover in my long-term review of the 14 Pro Max is durability, design, and color. The first thing I want to mention is that these Pro iPhones honestly feel like a piece of jewelry in your hand. From the matte back to the ultra glossy stainless steel finish, when you're holding a Pro iPhone, it is unlike any other smartphone you can get on the market. It honestly does feel like an ultra high-end piece of jewelry, and it just feels really special when you're holding this iPhone without a case in your hand. In terms of just that luxurious look, I do think that this deep purple is a more luxurious looking color compared to the Sierra Blue from last year. I do think Apple has made better colors on their Pro phones. I do prefer the Sierra Blue and also the Alpine Green from the 13 Pro, but just in terms of pure luxury, I really do like the look of the dark purple on the matte finish of the 14 Pro. In terms of durability, the stainless steel has held up pretty well. However, in the last couple hundred days, I have sort of adopted the mindset of Casey Neistat, where I kind of view this as a tool. So I rarely use a case on my phone and I toss it around and I'm dropping it all the time. So in no ways do I baby my iPhone, but the condition is still pretty good. There is a pretty small nick here on the top left corner of the stainless steel. I don't know if it's going to come through on video, but I can feel it when I rub my finger over the corner. And the other day I had my iPhone mounted on the wall and I dropped the stainless steel on one of my dumbbells, and it actually ended up denting the dumbbell instead of the phone. And that's because of Mohs scale of hardness. The stainless steel is actually harder than aluminum. So if I drop this on my aluminum dumbbell, funny enough, it's actually going to damage the dumbbell before it damages my iPhone, which was kind of funny. The stainless steel on the sides does have a bunch of scratches, but because the steel picks up a bunch of fingerprints, I rarely ever see the scratches because I'm just seeing the oils from my finger instead. And the matte glass on the back looks almost perfect from day one. I don't see any scratches at all. And something I was really surprised with is the camera lens. I thought because I don't use a phone case and I always put my phone face down on the table like this, I thought for sure I would have some scratches on the lenses of my iPhone. But because these lens covers have some traces of sapphire in them, they are not going to scratch as easily as the display will. And speaking of the display, you can see it's kind of covered in fingerprints here just from me holding it in this example. But if I quickly wipe it off on my pants, I will try to show you some of the scratches. And if it doesn't show up on this A roll, I will get some B-roll up close shots and show you some of the scratches on this screen. It definitely isn't in perfect condition, and that's because I sometimes place my phone face down on the table and sometimes I accidentally push it across the table, which is going to scratch the screen. I do think that there are some phones on the market, such as Android phones, which do have a better scratch resistance, but I do think that iPhones are definitely ahead of the pack in terms of drop resistance, because I have dropped this iPhone without a case face first so many times onto concrete, gravel, and even my granite kitchen countertop. And this screen has not cracked no matter what I do. There are a ton of scratches, like I said, but it just feels like this screen is indestructible and refuses to shatter on me. In terms of everyday usability with the stainless steel, it definitely does make the phone feel heavy. It does add durability, like I said, and when there are not fingerprints on the side, it does look pretty nice, but it does add some unnecessary weight to the iPhone. And I think that is one of the contributing factors as to why Apple is switching to titanium with the iPhone 15 Pro. So I'm really looking forward to that. And one very small thing I'll mention here at the end is the camera design. Now, unfortunately, I think that this problem is actually going to be getting even worse with the iPhone 15 Pro, and that is the dust that collects around the camera. Because the camera sticks out so much from the back of the iPhone, whenever I take my iPhone out of my pocket, there is so much dust around the cameras, which can get pretty annoying. So I find myself needing to clean the camera lenses almost every day on my iPhone 14 Pro. If you have seen some of the renders of the upcoming iPhone 15 Pro, the camera sticks out so far from the back of that iPhone that it's almost comical. So the cameras on iPhones, while they are very impressive, they do stick out quite a bit from the back of the iPhone, which can collect dust. But it's a pretty small problem to put up with when you look at the photo and video quality you get out of this phone. So that's going to do it for my long-term review of the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Hopefully this video, I know it was quite long, but hopefully it answered any questions you had with this iPhone in terms of long-term usability. If you guys enjoyed this video, please drop a like and also subscribe if you haven't already. My name is Michael with IDB. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.